My name is Ingrid Halvorsen and I'm 41. I was standing in my kitchen in a damp wool coat when my sister handed me the envelope. I had just walked in from the cemetery. My boots were still wet from the grass. The collar of my coat smelled like rain and wood smoke from the gas heaters they'd set up at the graveside, and I hadn't taken it off yet because I hadn't decided if I was staying. Maren was already inside when I got there. She had driven separately from the reception and arrived before me. I didn't ask why. The house, my father's house, still had people moving through it, aunts and cousins from Bellingham carrying casserole dishes from the counter to the table, the sound of low voices and chair legs on hardwood and someone running water in the kitchen sink. I stood in the front hall and pulled my gloves off one finger at a time. Maren came out of the kitchen and handed me the envelope. She held it out the way you hand someone a bill they've been avoiding. Not aggressive. Matter of fact. The house is mine now, she said. Dad wanted it that way. I looked at the envelope. Standard legal size. My father's address in the upper left corner, pre-printed. No stamp. I looked at Maren's hand still extended toward me and I took it. She watched me. Her face went still when I didn't react. That stillness held for maybe 4 seconds. Then she turned and walked back toward the living room where our Aunt Sigrid was arranging food on the table with the careful attention she gave to things that didn't need it. I set the envelope on the kitchen table without opening it. My phone was in my coat pocket. I hadn't checked it since before the service. I pulled it out and saw a missed call from a 360 area code I didn't recognize, flagged at 11:47 a.m. We had been at the graveside by then, standing in the rain while the pastor read from a card in a plastic sleeve so the paper wouldn't get wet. There was a voicemail attached to the call. I pressed play and held the phone against my ear and stood at the kitchen table with one hand flat on the envelope. The voice was a woman's. Professional and unhurried. She said she was calling from the Whatcom County Auditor's Office, Deed Recording Division. She said there was a recorded instrument filed under my father's name last week that I might want to be aware of, and that I was welcome to call her back at my convenience. She left a direct number and spelled her last name once slowly. I stood there in my wet coat. The diesel and salt smell of the ferry terminal from that morning was still on me. I hadn't eaten since the night before. I pressed end on the voicemail and looked at the envelope on the table. The firs outside the kitchen window were dark with rain. The light was going already, that flat gray island light that turns the water the color of old pewter by 3 in the afternoon. I called the number back. The phone rang twice. She answered on the third ring. I gave her my father's name and the parcel number from memory. I had looked it up 6 months ago for an unrelated reason and the number had stayed with me the way numbers do when you work in property records long enough. She pulled the file. There was a pause and the sound of a keyboard and then she said, "Yes. There's a quitclaim deed recorded here. Filed 8 days ago. Grantor is Carl Halvorsen. Grantee is Maren Osgood." I said, "What was the notarization date?" She gave it to me. I said, "Thank you." I set the phone face down on the table next to the envelope. In the living room someone laughed quietly at something. The water in the kitchen pipes knocked once and went quiet. I stood there and I didn't move. My father's name was Carl Halvorsen. He built the house on Lummi Island in 1979 on a quarter-acre lot backed by a stand of Douglas firs. 3 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a covered porch that faced the water. He poured the concrete for the front steps himself the summer I was born. When I was 7, he let me press my hand into a section of wet concrete near the base of the porch railing before it set. The print was still there the last time I checked, 3 weeks ago, when I drove up to help him move a piece of furniture he'd decided needed to be in a different room. He had the room rearranged already by the time I arrived. He didn't need my help. He just wanted someone there to see that he had done it. He lived in that house for 43 years. My mother lived there with him until her stroke in 2014. After that he lived alone, and the house became the thing we came back to, Maren and I, Aunt Sigrid, the cousins from Bellingham. Every Thanksgiving. Every Christmas. My father at the head of the table, hearing aides in for the occasion because he wanted to catch what the grandchildren said. He had 2 grandchildren through Maren. He called them by their names every time, even when Frida went through a phase of asking to be called something different every few months. He took that seriously. He practiced. I am a title examiner. I have worked in real property records for 16 years. I started at a small abstracting firm in Anacortes, marine-adjacent work, mostly boatyard acquisitions and harbor board conveyances and commercial dock transfers along the waterfront. Eventually, I moved to a regional title insurance company covering 3 counties in the northwest corner of the state. My job is to read the chain of title on a piece of property and identify defects. Breaks in the chain. Instruments recorded out of sequence. Deeds signed under conditions that would not survive a challenge. I know what a quitclaim deed is. I know what it transfers and what it does not. I know what it means when a document is recorded under a grantor's name 8 days before that grantor's death. It means someone was in a hurry. My husband Eric is a marine electrician. We have lived in Anacortes for 9 years, in a 2-story house 3 blocks from the ferry terminal. We have been married for 11 years and we have no children. Eric knew my father well enough to borrow tools from the shop without asking first, which was the highest form of trust my father extended to anyone. The 2 of them could spend an entire afternoon in the shop without exchanging more than 20 words, and both of them seemed to find that satisfactory. Eric had been the one to call the hospice coordinator in January when my father's doctor used the word prognosis in a way that required a follow-up call. I had been in a closing. Eric made the call and took the notes and sent them to me in a text message with no commentary attached, just the information, which was what I needed. Maren is 4 years older than me. She lives in Tacoma with her husband Don and their 2 children, Frida, who is 9, and Oscar, who is 12. Don is Dutch by birth and works in logistics and has, in 11 years of family dinners, expressed a strong opinion about exactly one thing. Last spring at Easter he mentioned between bites that waterfront property on the islands was appreciating fast enough that holding it as a family asset would eventually become impractical. He said it the way you mention weather. Informational. Nobody said anything back. My father looked at his plate and then asked whether the ferry schedule had changed for the summer, and that was that. I thought about that comment more than once in the months that followed. Not because I thought Don was wrong about the numbers. He wasn't. The 1/4-acre lot with the porch and the Douglas firs and the water view was worth something real now, more than my father had ever thought of it as being worth, and everyone at the table that Easter knew it even if no one said so out loud. The assessed value on the parcel had been updated the previous November, $487,400, up from $341,000 5 years prior. I had seen the notice in my father's mail and set it aside in the folder I kept for his important correspondence. I had not mentioned the number to Maren. My father had lived in that house for 43 years. He had replaced the water heater twice and the roof once and repainted the porch railing every 4 years without fail. He kept a garden along the south side of the house that produced more zucchini than any 2 families needed, and that he distributed to neighbors with the mild insistence of a man who had grown something and wanted it used. He knew every board in that house. He knew which step on the porch stairs creaked and which drawer in the kitchen stuck in humid weather and which window latch had to be lifted slightly before it would seat right. He had not thought of the house as an asset. He had thought of it as where he lived. On the kitchen windowsill above the sink he kept a small brass boat cleat. 4 inches long. It had come off a seiner he'd crewed on in his 20s, the summer before he met my mother, working the islands as far north as the Canadian line. He never said much about that summer. The cleat had been on that windowsill for as long as I could remember. It was not decorative. It was just there the way objects accumulate in houses where people actually live. He touched it sometimes without noticing, running his thumb along the shank of it while he stood at the sink looking out at the water. I noticed that habit when I was about 12. I never mentioned it to him. Maren knew the house the way visitors know a place. She knew where the good mugs were kept and which burner on the stove ran hot and where the extra blankets were in the hall closet. But she had not been here in the way I had been here, not in the overnight sense, not in the managing the mail and the prescriptions sense, not in the way that involves knowing which pharmacy delivers to the mainland and which step on the porch needs the weight shifted to the left to keep it quiet at night when you come in late and don't want to wake him. She had been here for holidays. She had been here for the big visible occasions. I had been here for the other kind. Standing in that kitchen with the phone face down on the table and the envelope still beside it, I knew exactly what questions I was going to need to ask. I was not going to ask them tonight. Tonight there were people in the living room and food on the table, and my sister was somewhere in the house believing she had already won. I took my coat off and hung it on the hook by the back door. I picked up the envelope and opened it. The deed was 2 pages. I read it once straight through the way I read every document, without expression, without speed. Then I set it flat on the table and read it again. I looked at the notarization date. I looked at the notary's seal. I looked at the grantor signature line. Then I folded it along its original crease and put it back in the envelope. I went to find Marin. My father's hip replacement was 18 months before he died. The surgery was at a hospital in Bellingham, and the recovery protocol called for 6 weeks of restricted mobility followed by physical therapy 3 times a week at an outpatient clinic in Anacortes. He could not stay on the island during that period. The ferries were not reliable enough in winter weather for someone who could not miss a therapy appointment, and the island house had no bathroom on the ground floor. He needed to be on the mainland. He needed someone to be responsible for the logistics. He stayed with Eric and me. The 6 weeks became 11. A secondary inflammation in the joint extended the protocol, and the therapist wanted to see him 3 times a week through the full course to make sure the alignment held. My father slept in our second bedroom. The first weekend before he arrived, Eric installed a grab bar in the bathroom wall, steel anchored into the stud, because the builder-grade towel bar was not rated for weight-bearing use and my father would use whatever was closest. Eric did it Saturday morning without being asked or told. He bought the hardware himself and had the work done before noon. My father ran his hand along the bar his first morning there. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. I drove him to physical therapy on Tuesdays and Thursdays for 9 weeks. His first appointment was at 7:20 a.m. We left the house at 6:42 a.m. to make the light on the bridge approach before the ferry backup started. I drove him every session except 2, when Eric covered because I had closings that couldn't be moved. On Tuesdays I brought a file box of abstracting work and sat in the parking structure and worked from the car. On Thursdays I didn't bring work. I just sat. During those 11 weeks I paid the utility bills on the Lummi Island house so the pipes wouldn't freeze and the power wouldn't drop. My father's mail was forwarded to our address. I sorted it once a week and set aside anything that required his attention: medical correspondence, the quarterly water district statement at $214 per year, a letter from his accountant, and left the rest in a folder on the kitchen table where he could reach it without asking. I managed his 3 monthly prescriptions through a pharmacy in Anacortes that offered mainland delivery, because the island pharmacy's route didn't cross the water. I paid the co-pays at the clinic window each visit, all 17 visits, because my father kept his wallet in the drawer of the nightstand in the second bedroom and kept forgetting it was there, and after the 3rd week I stopped reminding him and just paid. Marin visited once during those 11 weeks. She came on a Sunday in the 5th week and stayed 4 hours. She brought wine and a rotisserie chicken. She sat with my father in the living room and they watched a documentary about the ferry system. She cried a little when she left. My father patted her hand. After she drove away he said to me, "She was always more sensitive than you." He meant it as a compliment to her. I said nothing. When my father was cleared to return to the island I drove him myself on the 10:15 a.m. ferry. I carried his bag up the porch steps, the ones he'd poured himself, with my handprint in the concrete at the railing base, and I unlocked the front door and walked through the house before he came inside. I checked the bathroom, the back porch, the kitchen. The heat had been on low and the pipes were fine. I turned it up to a livable temperature and checked the refrigerator, which I had stocked the day before. I also checked the grab bar I'd had a contractor install in his island bathroom the month prior, because I had measured the wall myself and called 3 contractors before I found one who could get to the island on short notice. I left my father in his chair with the marine weather report on the television and drove back to Anacortes on the 4:15 p.m. ferry. That was the first time. 10 months later, his neighbor Bjorn Christensen called me at 6:09 a.m. on a Tuesday. My father had a fever of 103.1. He was confused. He'd been declining for a few days but thought he was just tired, the way men of his generation decide they are tired when their bodies are trying to tell them something more specific. Bjorn had gone to check on him that morning as he did most mornings, a habit he'd established without being asked, and that I had quietly relied on for 2 years, and found my father at the kitchen table in yesterday's clothes, unable to say what day it was. I was on the 6:15 a.m. ferry. I had my father at St. Joseph's in Bellingham by 8:40 a.m. He was admitted for 4 days. Urinary tract infection, severe enough to require 4 antibiotics for the first 2 days. I stayed the first night at a motel 2 blocks from the hospital. I drove back to Anacortes the second morning to cover a closing that had been rescheduled once already and could not move again. Eric stayed the second night. I covered the third and fourth nights, and the fourth morning I handled the discharge paperwork and drove my father back to the island house and stayed through the weekend to make sure the antibiotic protocol was stable and he was eating. I paid the motel both nights. I put the mileage on my own car. I did not track either. Marin called on day 2. She asked whether she should come. I told her we had it covered. She said to let her know if that changed. It didn't change. She didn't come. My father recovered. He was himself again within 2 weeks. The Sunday after his second follow-up appointment he called me, and we talked for nearly 40 minutes about nothing: the ferry schedule changes for the fall, the price of marine-grade epoxy, whether Bjorn's dog had been in the garden again. At the end of the call he said, "You're steady, Ingrid." Then he said goodbye. I didn't know then that there were 7 months left. The last 7 months were quiet. He declined slowly and with a deliberateness that suited him. He kept his doctor appointments. He paid his own bills. He managed the house the way he always had, imperfectly but consistently. I drove out on the ferry every 2 or 3 weeks, sometimes with Eric, usually alone. I brought groceries and stayed overnight when the weather was bad and the 8:30 p.m. return didn't feel worth the risk. In September I recaulked the bathroom window frame, which had been letting cold air in against the sill, because he'd mentioned it once in passing and I knew he wouldn't mention it again. In October I cleaned the gutters when the furs dropped their needles and he couldn't safely manage the ladder. In November I replaced the pull cord on the kitchen light fixture above the table, a 5-minute job that had been on his list since spring, and he watched me do it from his chair and said, "I kept meaning to get to that." I said, "I know." I paid the water district bill twice when it slipped past him during a stretch when his energy was low and the mail was piling up on the counter unopened. I renewed his vehicle registration when the notice came to my address by mistake. I was still listed on some of his correspondence from the hip surgery period when his mail had been forwarded to us. I drove him to his 2 final doctor appointments in February and March because he had stopped feeling confident about the ferry crossing alone on days when his balance was unreliable. I sat with him in the evenings when I stayed over, watching the water go dark through the kitchen window while he had his coffee and the Marine Weather Channel ran in the background. He never spoke to me about the house in any formal sense. He didn't tell me what he intended to do with it. I didn't ask. That wasn't the kind of family we were, not in terms of property or money, not those conversations. I assumed there was a will. I knew there was a will because I had found the estate attorney's number for him 2 years before, after my mother died, when he'd decided it was time to update the documents. He'd gone to the appointment. He'd come home and said it was handled and never said what was in it, and I hadn't asked. The attorney's name was still in my phone. The county auditor's number was in my phone now too. I found Marin in the living room sitting in the armchair by the window with a cup of coffee. The cousins from Bellingham had moved to the kitchen. Aunt Sigrid was near the front door talking to someone I didn't recognize. Marin looked up when I came in. Her eyes went to the envelope in my hand. "Did you read it?" she asked. "Yes," I said. She nodded the way people nod when they think something is already settled. I sat down across from her. The coffee on the side table near my chair was still warm. I didn't touch it. "We should talk," I said. "Not tonight. Tomorrow." "There's nothing to talk about," Marin said. "It's legal." He signed it. I looked at her. I didn't answer. Marin was in the kitchen when I came downstairs at 7:14 a.m. She had made coffee and was standing at the counter with both hands around a mug, looking out at the water. The firs were still dark. The ferry horn sounded once in the distance, the 7:10 a.m. run to Gooseberry Point, and then dissolved into the wet air and the kitchen went quiet again. I poured myself a cup and sat down at the kitchen table. She didn't turn around right away. She stood there looking at the water and I sat there looking at my coffee, and neither of us said anything for almost a full minute. The refrigerator hummed. A gust came through the firs and the branches moved once and then settled back and went still. "I want to talk about the deed," I said. She turned then. She set her mug on the counter and crossed her arms, not aggressive, just settled, the way someone stands when they've already decided how a conversation is going to end. "I knew you'd want to make this complicated," she said. "I'm not making it complicated," I said. "I'm asking you to explain it to me." "There's nothing to explain. Dad wanted me to have the house. He said so." "When did he say so?" Over the years. Many times. That's not what I'm asking, I said. I'm asking when he decided to record a deed. 8 days before he died. She looked at me. Her jaw tightened. He was of sound mind. I didn't say he wasn't. You're implying it. I'm asking about the timeline, I said. That's different. She uncrossed her arms and picked up her mug. She turned back toward the window. He called me in February. He said he'd been thinking about the house and he wanted it settled while he was still able to make decisions clearly. He said he wanted it to go to me because I have children and you don't, and the house should stay in a family that will actually use it. I didn't answer. That's not cruel, she said. That's practical. He was a practical man. You know that better than anyone. I know that, I said. Then you understand. I understand what you're telling me, he said, I said. I'd like to understand the rest of it. She turned back around. What rest of it? Who prepared the deed? A pause. Short. An attorney. Which attorney? Someone Dawn found. In Bellingham. Not Dad's estate attorney. Dad's estate attorney was slow and expensive and Dad didn't want to wait. Slow, I said. How long had he been waiting? She looked at me. What? If the attorney was slow, Dad must have approached him first. How long did he wait before Dawn found someone else? A beat. I don't know the specifics. Did Dad's estate attorney know about the transfer before it was recorded? I don't know what Dad told other people. Did you tell him? It wasn't my place. Dad made a decision about his own property. He was allowed to. He was, I said. I'm not arguing that. Then what are you arguing? I'm not arguing anything yet. I'm asking questions. She set the mug down again. The color left her face briefly, something moved through it, and then her expression settled back into that careful calm. You're treating this like one of your title cases, she said. This is our family. This is Dad's house. Yes, I said. It is. Was, she said. It was. I kept my voice even. Was it discussed with any of us before it happened? It didn't need to be discussed. It was his property. I'm not disputing that. Then why are we sitting here? Because an attorney I've never heard of prepared a quitclaim deed for a man in declining health 8 days before his death, transferring his primary asset to one of his 2 children, and no one mentioned it to the other child, I said. That's not complicated, Marin. That's actually a fairly specific pattern. She looked at me for a long moment. You think I manipulated a dying man? I didn't say that. You didn't have to. What I said is that there's a pattern. I don't know yet what it means. That's why I'm asking. She pulled a chair out from the table and sat down across from me. She set both palms flat on the table surface and her voice went low and precise in a way that was more controlled than calm. You drove Dad to appointments. You paid some bills. I know that. I'm not pretending it didn't happen. But it doesn't mean you get to decide what happens to his property. That's not how inheritance works. I didn't say anything. He loved you, she said. He loved both of us. But you made yourself indispensable. That's something you chose. Nobody asked you to manage every little thing. You did it because it's how you control situations. And then you expected to be compensated for it. I let the silence hold. I'm not saying that to be unkind, she continued. Her voice stayed measured. I'm saying it because I think you believe your own version of things. You drove him to appointments because you live 14 miles away. You paid bills because you had access to his mail. Those were circumstances, not sacrifices. And Dad's decision about the house was not about any of that. It was about his grandchildren. About Frida and Oscar having a place on the island. You don't have children. That's not a judgment. It's just true. I looked at the table. He told me himself, she said. He said he didn't want the house to sit empty or get sold to strangers. He said he wanted it to stay in use. And I have a family that will use it. I looked up at her. He told you this in February. Yes. And the deed was signed when? I don't know the exact date. I do, I said. 11 days before he died. Notarized on a Tuesday. She didn't say anything. I've been doing title work for 16 years, I said. I've seen a lot of deeds prepared under time pressure for grantors in declining health. There are things you notice about them. Characteristics. What are you suggesting? I'm not suggesting anything. I'm going to pull the instrument from county records, look at it properly, and call Dad's estate attorney. A deed recorded outside the estate process by an attorney Dad had never worked with before is something that attorney is going to need to know about. Her face went still. You're going to contest it. I'm going to look at it. You're going to drag this through a legal process and make it ugly and expensive and turn the last decision Dad made into a courtroom dispute. I'm going to look at a document, I said. That's what I do. It's what I've done for 16 years. If it holds up, it holds up. She stood. Her chair scraped the floor. This is exactly what Dad was worried about, she said. Her voice had some heat in it now, controlled, banked. He knew you'd do this. That's why he didn't tell you. He said he told me specifically, Marin, if Ingrid knows before it's done, she'll find a way to complicate it. Because that's what Ingrid does. She manages things until they go the way she needs them to. I looked at her. I didn't answer. She picked up her mug. She carried it to the sink, rinsed it, set it in the drying rack. She dried her hands on the dish towel that hung from the oven handle, my father's towel, faded blue stripe, soft from 30 years of washing, and she turned around and looked at me with something approaching pity. You gave a lot, she said. I know you did. But giving a lot doesn't mean you get to own everything. It doesn't make it yours. I know that, I said. Then let it go. I'm not trying to own anything, I said. I'm trying to understand what happened. You know what happened, she said. You just don't like it. I looked at her. Who was in the room when he signed? A beat. What? When Dad signed the deed. Who was in the room? She looked at the window. The attorney. The notary. And? She looked back at me. I was there. He asked me to be there. He didn't want to do it alone. He was tired that day. You were there when he signed. Yes. You drove him to the appointment? She paused. One breath. Yes. And you brought him home afterward? Yes. Of course I did. How many times did you come out in February? Her eyes moved. A few. I was here the second Saturday, I said. He didn't mention you'd been out. I didn't know I needed to report my schedule to you. I said nothing. She reached for the mug that was already in the rack, stopped herself, let her hand drop back to her side. She looked at the counter for a moment and then looked back at me. Ingrid, she said, and her voice lost some of the precision it had held all morning. He was our father. He was sick. He was scared. He wanted things settled. Is that so hard to understand? No, I said. It isn't. Then, it's not hard to understand at all, I said. That's actually the part that concerns me. She went quiet. Her hands were flat on the counter behind her. He was scared, I said. He was tired. He wanted things settled. That's when people make decisions they wouldn't otherwise make, or have decisions made for them that look like their own. I'm not accusing you of anything specific. I'm saying I need to understand what actually happened. I owe him that much. She looked at me for a long moment. He wanted me to have it, she said. Quieter now. Almost just to herself. I know you don't believe that. I don't know what I believe yet, I said. That's why I need to see the documents. She pushed off from the counter. Look at whatever you want, she said. It won't change anything. It's recorded. It's done. Recorded deeds can be challenged. You're really going to do this to our family? I'm going to look at a document, I said. That's all I've said since we sat down. She looked at me one more time. Her face was still. Then she shook her head. She walked out of the kitchen. I heard her footsteps on the stairs, slow and deliberate, going up. I sat at the table. The brass boat cleat was on the windowsill above the sink, where it always was. The morning light had come up enough to catch the edge of it, dull gold, worn smooth on the shank where my father's thumb had gone over it 10,000 times. I looked at it for a while. The furs outside moved once in a gust and went still. The silence in the kitchen was the kind that comes after someone leaves a room and before the house settles back into what it sounds like when it's empty. I got up. I poured the rest of my coffee out. I rinsed the cup and set it in the rack next to Marin's. I went to the small desk in the corner of the living room. My father's desk. The one with the shallow drawer that stuck in damp weather, that he had never fixed because he said he liked having one thing that reminded him the house was old. He kept his important papers in a manila folder there, held shut with a rubber band, same place for 30 years. I had organized that folder twice in the last year. I knew exactly what was inside it. I pulled the drawer open. It caught once in the frame and then slid out. The folder was there. I picked it up and set it on the desk surface, took the rubber band off and opened it. 8 documents. Vehicle registration. Medical insurance card in a paper sleeve. Photocopy of his social security card. Water district account statement. A letter from his accountant 14 months old. A copy of a power of attorney signed 2 years back, listing me as his agent for financial and property matters. And one more. The last document in the folder was a letter. Single page, folded in thirds. Attorney's letterhead. Bellingham address. I didn't read it right away. I stood at the desk with the letter in my hand and looked out the window. The firs were still. The water beyond them was flat and gray and the sky above it was nearly the same color, and the line between them was barely visible from where I stood. There were no boats on the water. There were no birds. Just the water and the sky and the firs, exactly as they had been every morning of my father's life on this island. My father's estate attorney's card was in my phone. I had saved it there 2 years ago after I found the number for my father, after he asked me to look it up because he couldn't find the business card. I set the letter down. I took out my phone and called the number. 4 rings. Voicemail. I left a message, my father's name, my name, the parcel number for the Lummi Island property, and the recording date shown on the deed. I said I had a question about the estate documents. I said I would appreciate a call back at the earliest opportunity. I gave my cell number twice, clearly, and said thank you. I hung up. I stood at the desk and looked at the letter. Then I picked it up and unfolded it. It was dated 9 days before my father died. Letterhead of an attorney named Brandt, licensed in Whatcom County, Bellingham address. Addressed to my father at the island address. It read, enclosed please find the executed quitclaim deed for the Lummi Island property, together with the recording receipt from the Whatcom County Auditor's Office. The transfer is complete and the instrument has been recorded as of the date shown on the receipt. Please retain these documents for your records. It has been a pleasure assisting you with this matter. I read it twice. Then I set it flat on the desk and looked at the open folder. The recording receipt was not inside. The deed itself was not in the folder. Only the cover letter remained. The letter informing my father that the recording was already complete. Marin had come to this house before the funeral. She had gone through this drawer. She had taken the deed and the recording receipt and left the cover letter, the one document that, on its face, did not show the grantee's name or the terms of the transfer. I stood at the desk for a long time. I looked at the power of attorney beside the cover letter. My name is Agent. Signed 2 years ago during the estate update appointment I had helped my father schedule, with the attorney whose voicemail I had just filled. I took the power of attorney out of the folder and laid it beside the cover letter on the desk surface. Then I went to the kitchen and stood at the sink. I looked at the brass cleat on the windowsill. I reached out and picked it up. It was lighter than it looked and warmer than I expected. The thin winter sun had been coming through the window glass all morning. 4 inches of worn brass. Smooth on the shank where my father's thumb had worn it down over 40 years of standing at this sink and looking out at this water. I turned it over once in my palm. I felt the weight of it, the warmth of it. Then I set it back down on the sill in exactly the same spot. I went back to the desk. I found a clean envelope in the lower compartment. My father had kept a small supply there for as long as I could remember, the same brand, the same size, stored in the same corner. I put the cover letter and the power of attorney inside the envelope and sealed it. I set the sealed envelope on the desk. I went to the kitchen and put the kettle on and stood at the counter while the water heated. The ferry horn sounded once, out past the point. The sound came across the water flat and even and then dissolved. I didn't move until the kettle boiled. I made tea. I sat back down at the kitchen table and held the mug in both hands and looked at the window and waited. At 9:31 a.m. my phone rang. Bellingham area code. I answered. This is David House, the voice said. I'm returning a call for Ingrid Halvorsen regarding Carl Halvorsen's estate. Yes, I said. Thank you for calling back. I'm Carl's daughter. A quitclaim deed was recorded on the Lummi Island property 11 days before my father died, and I don't believe you prepared it. A pause. Measured and careful. No, he said. I did not. Was the transfer consistent with the testamentary documents you prepared for him? A longer pause this time. Something choosing its words. Ms. Halvorsen, he said, I think this is a conversation we should have in person. I agree, I said. I can be in Bellingham by noon. I'll have the time cleared. One more question before I come, I said. Did you know the deed was being prepared while it was happening? This pause was different from the others. Longer. Weighted in a way the others hadn't been. No, he said. I did not. Did my father contact you after the deed was recorded? A beat. Short and deliberate. He did. I waited. The line was quiet. Through the kitchen window the water was still. I think, he said slowly and with real care, that part of the conversation should happen in person. Yes, I said. I'll be there at noon. I hung up. I sat at the table with my tea. The firs outside moved once in a gust off the water and went still again. The light had changed, the cloud cover was thinning toward the south, and the line between water and sky was sharper than it had been when I first came downstairs. I thought about what my father had said once, standing at this sink, running his thumb along the shank of the cleat without knowing he was doing it. He had said, some things you don't argue about. You just stay steady until the other person runs out of road. I had been maybe 30. I didn't know what he meant at the time. I assumed it was something about a contractor or a neighbor or a dispute with the harbor association. He hadn't explained himself and I hadn't asked, and I had filed it away under the general category of things my father said that I didn't fully understand until some later point. I finished my tea. I rinsed the mug and set it in the rack. I heard Marin's footsteps on the stairs. She appeared in the kitchen doorway with her coat on and her bag over her shoulder and the careful expression of someone who has decided exactly what they're going to say. She looked at me. I looked at her. I'm going back to Tacoma, she said. There's nothing more to do here. All right, I said. She looked across the room at the desk. The folder was still open on the surface. The rubber band was coiled beside it. What are you doing with his papers? She said. Organizing them, I said. I'll be managing the estate. Her jaw tightened. The house is handled. There are other assets, I said. And the will needs to go through probate regardless of the deed. She stood in the doorway. When she spoke again her voice had lost most of its precision. He wanted me to have it, she said. He really did. I'm not making that up. I believe you believe that, I said. The color left her face. She turned and walked to the front door. It opened. I heard the porch boards flex under her feet, the newer boards, the ones my father had replaced 2 summers ago. I heard her car start in the gravel and back out and pull away down the drive, and then the sound diminished until there was nothing but the water and the firs and the low hum of the refrigerator behind me. I stood where I was. I looked at the cleat on the windowsill for a long time. Then I picked up my bag. I took the sealed envelope from the desk and put it in the front pocket of my bag where I would not need to dig for it. I put on my coat. I went out the back door and got in my car and set the bag on the passenger seat. I started the car. At 10:02 a.m. I pulled onto the approach road for the 10:15 a.m. ferry to Gooseberry Point. I found a spot on the car deck near the port rail and turned the engine off. The ferry horn sounded twice and the boat began to move. Through the windshield I watched the island recede, the firs first, going dark against the pale sky, and then the roof line of the harborside buildings, and then just the tree line, green and undifferentiated, the same as any other shore from this distance. The bag was on the seat beside me. The sealed envelope was in the front pocket. I did not open it yet. The ferry docked at Gooseberry Point at 10:47 a.m. I started the car. I drove off the ramp and onto the county road and turned south toward Bellingham. The road ran along the water for the first 2 miles and then curved inland through a stretch of second-growth fir, the same dark green on both sides, the same pale sky above the breaks in the canopy. I didn't turn the radio on. I drove. I parked in the lot behind the attorney's building on Cornwall Avenue at 11:43 a.m. I turned the engine off. I sat. I took the sealed envelope out of my bag and held it. I looked at the handwriting on the outside, my own from that morning, ballpoint pen, the words power of attorney and cover letter written in my own shorthand on the face of the envelope. I turned it over. I turned it back. I set it flat on my thigh. I thought about the notarization date. I thought about the Tuesday. I thought about my father in an attorney's office in Bellingham, tired, Marin beside him, signing a document that transferred the house he had lived in for 43 years to one of his 2 children while the other was 14 miles away unaware. I thought about what he had said on the phone 9 months before he died. "You're steady, Ingrid." I sat in the car for another 4 minutes. Then I put the envelope back in the front pocket of my bag. I got out of the car. I locked it. I crossed the parking lot. I walked to the building entrance. I pulled the door open. I went in. I told the receptionist my name. She nodded. She said he was expecting me. She picked up the phone to let him know I was there. The receptionist led me down a short hallway to a corner office. She knocked once and opened the door. David House was standing when I came in. He was in his 60s, heavy through the shoulders, the kind of man who had probably been an athlete once and now just looked solid. He had the careful expression of someone who had been thinking about this meeting since 9:30. "Ms. Halvorsen," he said. "Thank you for coming." "Thank you for clearing the time," I said. He gestured to the chair across from his desk. I sat. He sat. On the desk between us were 2 manila folders closed, aligned parallel to the desk edge. He had prepared for this. I set my bag on the floor beside my chair. The sealed envelope was in the front pocket. "I want to tell you what I can," he said, "and be honest with you about what I can't, because some of what your father told me was told in confidence and some of it wasn't." "I understand," I said. "What I can tell you," he said, "is that the quitclaim deed recorded 11 days before your father's death was not consistent with the testamentary documents I prepared for him. It was not inconsistent in a trivial way. It was directly contrary to his stated wishes as I understood them at the time of the most recent revision." I didn't move. "What he had in the will," Hal said, "was a specific bequest. The Lummi Island property was to be held in a family trust, administered jointly by both daughters, with neither having the unilateral right to sell. The intent was that the house would remain in use, available to both families, for as long as both daughters wished it. If both agreed to sell, the proceeds would be split equally." I looked at the folder on the desk. "He called me," Hal said, "approximately 6 days before he died. I want to be accurate here, he was distressed. That's the word I would use. He said that he had been persuaded to sign a document and that he wasn't sure he had understood what he was signing. He said he wanted to know if it could be undone." I kept my voice even. "What did you tell him?" "I told him that a recorded deed is difficult but not impossible to challenge, and that the avenue available to him depended on the specific facts, whether there had been undue influence, whether his capacity at the time of signing was impaired in any legally cognizable way, whether the attorney who prepared the deed had met his duties of care. I told him we should meet." "Did you meet?" "We did not," he said. "He died 4 days later." I said nothing. "I've been sitting with this since the call," Hal said. "I didn't know how to reach out to the family without knowing who knew what. When you called this morning I'll be honest, I was relieved." I looked at the folder closest to me on the desk. "Is that the will?" I asked. "Yes." "And the other one?" "Notes from the call," he said. "Contemporaneous. I wrote them immediately after we spoke." I reached into the front pocket of my bag. I took out the sealed envelope. I set it on the desk between us. House looked at it. "A cover letter from the attorney who prepared the deed," I said. "And the power of attorney my father signed 2 years ago naming me as his agent for financial and property matters." House looked at the envelope for a moment. Then he looked up at me. "The other documents, the deed itself, the recording receipt, those are gone," I said. "They were removed from my father's desk before the funeral. I found only the cover letter." House nodded slowly. He was not surprised. That registered somewhere in me, but I let it settle without touching it. "I want to ask you something," I said. "And I want you to answer as plainly as you're able." "All right. In your professional judgment, based on what my father told you, based on the circumstances you're aware of, does this deed reflect his actual wishes?" House was quiet for a moment. He looked at his hands. "No," he said. "I don't believe it does." I kept my voice even. "Then I'd like to discuss what options are available." He reached for the first folder. He slid it across the desk toward me. He opened it. The will was on top. 3 pages, stapled at the corner, my father's signature on the 3rd page with a date beside it and 2 witness signatures below. I looked at the signature. I had seen my father's handwriting 10,000 times on checks and letters and birthday cards and the backs of photographs. This was his handwriting. Careful and deliberate, the same as it had always been. I read the relevant section. I read it twice. House let me read without saying anything. When I looked up, he said, "The specific bequest language is on page 2. The trust provisions are on page 3. I turned to page 2. I read. Then I turned to page 3. I set the will back on the desk. He reached for the second folder. He slid it across to me and opened it. The call notes were 2 pages, handwritten, dated. At the top of the first page was the time, 4:17 p.m. The date was 6 days before my father died. I read through the notes. House had written in a compressed shorthand that I could mostly parse, abbreviations for legal concepts, shorthand for the names of documents. But the 2 phrases he had written out in full were legible and unmistakable, underlined once each. She kept telling me it was just paperwork. I don't think I understood what I was giving away. I set the notes back on the desk. We sat in that office for 2 hours. He walked me through the will, the actual document, the actual language, and through what my father had told him on that call. He explained the legal landscape carefully. Undue influence was a viable theory. Diminished capacity was harder to establish but not impossible given the documented health decline. The attorney who had prepared the deed, Brandt, had a duty to ensure the grantor understood the nature and consequences of the instrument. If that duty had not been met, the deed was potentially voidable. "What would it take?" I said. "An attorney experienced in estate litigation," he said. "An action in Whatcom County Superior Court. The call notes, the will, any testimony about the circumstances of the signing, who was present, how the appointment was arranged, whether your father was advised to seek independent counsel." "He wasn't," I said. "Advised to seek independent counsel." "You know that?" "Marin told me she drove him to the appointment. She was in the room when he signed. There's no indication he had any independent advice about what he was signing." House wrote something in his notes. "What about the notary?" I said. "Brandt's notary? Is there a record of who that was?" "The notary's name would be on the instrument," he said. "The county keeps the recording. You'd be able to get a copy." "I'll pull it," I said. "The notary has a duty too," he said. "To confirm the grantor is signing freely and voluntarily. Without duress. Without undue pressure." He paused. "If your sister was in the room, that complicates that question." I said nothing. "It doesn't void the notarization on its own," he said. "But it's a fact the litigation attorney will want to know." "I understand," I said. He set his pen down. He looked at me the way someone looks when they want to make sure you're actually all right. I kept my face even. "One more thing," he said. "The timing. 11 days before his death. If the health decline was documented, and from what you've described it was, that timeline is going to be significant. Courts look at proximity." "To what?" I said. "To the date of signing," he said. "And to the date of death." "I also know," I said, "that the appointment was arranged through my sister's husband, not through my father. And that it happened after, according to my sister, my father had already approached your office and found the process too slow." House stopped writing. He looked up at me. "He never approached me about transferring the property," he said. "Not in any form. The last time we spoke about the Lummi Island property before his call 6 days before his death was when we revised the will 2 years ago." I said, "I see." I kept my voice even. I kept my hands on the arms of the chair. House looked at me steadily. "I want to be useful to you. I can refer you to an estate litigation attorney I trust. I can make my call notes and the will available to that attorney with your authorization as the named agent under the power of attorney. That authorization may be relevant here. If the power of attorney was valid at the time the deed was executed, there are questions about whether your father could have made that conveyance without your knowledge or consent." "The power of attorney is durable," I said. "It was effective immediately on signing." "Then there's a question," he said carefully, "about whether a competing conveyance executed without the agent's knowledge was properly made." "One step at a time," I said. He nodded. I put the sealed envelope back in my bag. I took his referral. I thanked him. I stood up and we shook hands and I walked back down the hallway and through the reception area and out into the cold of the parking lot. I sat in my car for 10 minutes. The parking lot was quiet. A cedar branch above the entrance moved in the wind off the bay and then went still. I watched it. Then I called Marin. She answered on the fourth ring. She sounded careful already, the way you sound when you've been waiting for a call you knew was coming. I just left David House's office, I said. A pause. And? He read me the will, Marin. Silence. The house was supposed to go into a family trust, I said. Split administration. Neither of us could sell without the other's agreement. That was what Dad put in writing 2 years ago with his own attorney when he was healthy. The line was quiet for a long moment. He changed his mind, she said. Her voice was steady. People change their minds. He called House 6 days before he died, I said. He told him he wasn't sure he understood what he'd signed. He asked if it could be undone. Another silence. Longer. That's not, she started. House took contemporaneous notes, I said. 2 phrases. Verbatim. The first was, she kept telling me it was just paperwork. The second was, I don't think I understood what I was giving away. The silence this time was different. Something had gone out of it. He was confused, she said. He was sick. He called people and said things he didn't mean. He called his own attorney, I said. 6 days before he died. And told him he didn't think he understood what he was giving away. Ingrid. House took notes, I said. Contemporaneous. Written right after the call. The phrase he recorded verbatim was, she kept telling me it was just paperwork. A long pause. I heard her breathing on the line. He wasn't well, she said finally. He was frightened. He second-guessed everything in those last weeks. He called an attorney, I said. Not a friend. Not me. His attorney. That's not second-guessing. That's a specific action with a specific purpose. He didn't follow through. He died 4 days later, I said. He didn't get the chance. You don't know he would have followed through, she said. You don't know that. You told me he was of sound mind, I said. That was the first thing you said yesterday morning. He was of sound mind. A man of sound mind who calls his attorney 6 days before he dies and says, I don't think I understood what I was giving away. That's not a man who was satisfied with the decision. I told him the truth, she said. The deed was just paperwork. He was making too big a thing of it. I kept my voice even. You told me he wanted me to have it. You said he didn't want the house to sit empty or get sold to strangers. He did say that. And yet what he put in writing with independent counsel 2 years before he signed your deed was that neither of us would be able to sell it at all. Without the other's agreement. That's not a man who was worried about strangers. That's a man who wanted the house to stay in the family. Both families. Marin said nothing. He never told House he wanted to change that arrangement, I said. Not once. The first House heard that the deed had been recorded was when Dad called him to ask if it could be undone. The line was quiet. She said, I took care of him that February. I was there. You act like you were the only one who ever showed up. I know you were there, I said. I know you came. I'm not disputing that. Then stop acting like I manipulated him. You said giving a lot doesn't mean I get to own everything, I said. I agreed with you. I still do. I'm not trying to own it. I'm trying to make sure what happens to it is what he actually wanted. Not what he signed when he was tired and scared and someone kept telling him it was just paperwork. She said nothing for a moment. I heard her breath on the line. When she spoke again her voice was lower, more careful. You always had to be the one who understood everything better than everyone else. I'm not claiming that, I said. You are? You're the one who read the documents. You're the one who managed the mail. You're the one who knows how the deed works and what the will says and what Dad told his attorney 6 days before he died. You always have the information and everyone else is just operating with less. I kept my voice even. I have the information because I went and got it today. What I know is what Dad told his own attorney. Dad told me things too, she said. I know he did, I said. I believe you believe everything you've told me. But what he said to you and what he said to his attorney are 2 different things, and what he said to his attorney is in writing. Silence. What he wanted was in that will, I said. Both of us. Equal. Neither of us able to push the other out. Ingrid. Her voice was quiet now. Something had gone soft in it. You said Dad told you that if I found out before it was done I'd find a way to stop it, I said. That's what you told me this morning. Yes, she said. He was right, I said. Not because I want to control things. Because I know how to read a chain of title. And this one has a break in it. The line was quiet for a long time. I'd rather not make this ugly, I said. I mean that. The attorney I retain will reach out to your attorney. We can try to do this through negotiation before anything goes to court. But I'm going to do it, Marin. I'm going to see it through. She said, this is going to cost both of us. Yes, I said. It probably will. And at the end of it, even if you win, the house is still just a house. It doesn't bring him back. I know that, I said. Then why? Because he called his attorney 6 days before he died and said he didn't think he understood what he was giving away, I said. And he died before he could fix it. So I'm going to fix it for him. The line was quiet. I'll talk to Dawn, she said finally. Her voice was flat. Not angry. Just flat, the way a voice gets when a decision has been made that the speaker doesn't like. All right, I said. I'm not saying I agree with you, she said. I'm saying I'll talk to Dawn. I kept my voice even. You said he was of sound mind, I said. He was. And a man of sound mind called his own attorney and said he didn't think he understood what he was giving away. I'm going to let that mean what it means. She didn't answer. You said giving a lot doesn't mean you get to own everything, I said. You were right. This isn't about owning. It's about what he put in writing when no one was pushing him. A long pause. You said if I found out before it was done I'd find a way to stop it, I said. He knew me. I'm going to see it through. Ingrid. I said goodbye. She said goodbye. I ended the call. I sat in the parking lot on Cornwall Avenue and looked at the windshield. The cloud cover had moved fully south now and the sky above Bellingham was the hard flat blue that comes sometimes in late winter afternoons, bright without warmth, the kind of light that makes everything look precise and slightly cold. I sat there for a while. The engine ticked as it cooled. The bay was visible at the end of the block, flat and gray between the buildings. I watched a woman cross the parking lot with a bag over her shoulder, moving fast, not looking at anything. A truck backed out of a space at the far end. A gull went overhead, heading south into the blue. I thought about my father standing at the sink with his thumb on the shank of the cleat. I thought about all the mornings he had stood there. I thought about what it costs a person, a careful and deliberate person, a man who did not ask for help until he had run out of other options, to pick up the phone and call his attorney 6 days before he dies and say he doesn't think he understood what he signed. It costs something. It costs a particular kind of man a great deal. He had done it anyway. I started the car. I drove back to Anacortes. I took the ferry to the island one more time that evening, the 5:40 p.m. run, and I let myself into the house with my key and I stood in the kitchen in the dark for a moment before I turned the lights on. The kitchen was exactly as I had left it that morning. The folder on the desk was still open. The rubber band was still coiled on the surface beside it. The 2 cups were in the drying rack. The kettle was on the stove. I turned the overhead light on. I stood in the middle of the kitchen and looked at the room. The cleat was on the windowsill above the sink. I went to the sink. I stood there. I looked at it. I picked it up for the second time that day. It was the same weight it had always been. The same warmth from the window. I turned it over in my palm, one side, the other, back again, the way my father had turned it over without knowing he was doing it, standing at this sink for 43 years. I held it for a while. Then I set it down. Some things you hold for a moment and then put back. That doesn't mean they weren't worth holding. I went to the desk and closed the folder and put the rubber band back around it and put it back in the drawer. I pushed the drawer shut. It caught once and then seated the way it always did. I went to the back porch and sat in my father's chair. The water was dark by now. The firs were black against a sky that still had some gray in it above the western tree line, a last thin strip of light. I sat there for a long time. I thought about the will. I thought about the trust provision, both daughters jointly administered, neither able to push the other out. I thought about what my father had been trying to do when he put that language in, 2 years ago, healthy, with independent counsel and no one in the room but himself and David House. He had been trying to keep the house from becoming a thing that split his family. He had been trying to hold both of his daughters inside the same structure, the same agreement, together. That was what he had wanted. That was the thing he had tried to protect by picking up the phone 6 days before he died. I thought about Eric. I thought about how he had built the grab bar into the bathroom wall on a Saturday morning without being asked. I thought about the text message with the hospice coordinator's notes, just the information, no commentary. I thought about how some people show you what they are through the small specific things they do when no one is keeping score. My father was like that his whole life. He showed you what he valued by what he did without announcing it. The brass cleat on the windowsill. 40 years. He had not named it. He had not explained it. He had just kept it in its place. I called Eric. He answered on the second ring. Where are you? He said. The island, I said. I'm staying tonight. All right, he said. That was all. He didn't ask me to explain. He didn't tell me to come home. He said all right the way he said most things, quietly as a statement of fact, the way you acknowledge something that has already been decided. I'll be back tomorrow, I said. I know, he said. We talked for a few minutes about nothing. He told me the boat he was finishing had a wiring problem in the cabin panel that turned out to be simpler than it looked. I told him about the attorney's office, about the will, about the call notes. He listened without interrupting. When I was done, he said, Your dad was clear about what he wanted. Yes, I said. He was. Then you know what you're doing, he said. I said I did. I called the litigation attorney House had referred. I left a message. I said my name and my father's name and the parcel number, and that I would need to discuss options for challenging a recorded deed under circumstances of potential undue influence. I said I had contemporaneous call notes from the grantor's estate attorney, a prior testamentary document directly contrary to the deed, and evidence that the appointment had been arranged and attended by the beneficiary of the conveyance. I said I would be available tomorrow morning and asked her to call when she had time. I made dinner from what was in the refrigerator, eggs and bread and a can of soup I found in the cabinet, the kind my father kept for the weeks when he didn't feel like cooking. I heated it on the stove in the same small pot he always used, the one with the scorched handle from a gas flame incident 15 years ago that he had never replaced because the pot itself still worked fine. I ate at the kitchen table at the same spot I had eaten breakfast that morning, looking at the same window. The window was dark now. Just my own reflection, faint in the glass. I washed the plate and the pot and the spoon and set them in the rack. I went upstairs to the small back bedroom. I lay down on the bed in my clothes. Outside the firs moved in the wind that came up after dark. The house made the small sounds it always made at night, the creak of the porch boards contracting in the cold, the pipes ticking somewhere in the wall, the low hum of the furnace. I had stayed in this room so many times. I knew all its sounds. I lay there and I thought about my father saying, You're steady, Ingrid. I thought about what it had meant to him when he said it, and what it meant to me now. I thought about the handprint in the concrete at the base of the porch railing, the one he had let me press there when I was 7, the one still there under the moss. I had pressed it in while the concrete was wet and then stepped back and waited for it to set. My father had stood beside me and watched. When the concrete firmed, he had said, It'll be there a long time. He had been right. That was the thing about a record. A record is not an argument and it does not ask anything of anyone. It is simply there, in the concrete, in the ledger, in the file at the county auditor's office. It is there because someone pressed something into it when it was still possible to make a mark. My father had pressed his intentions into a will. He had pressed them again 6 days before he died into a phone call to his own attorney. Those were records. They existed in writing. They would be there when I needed them. If any part of what happened here stays with you, if you've ever sat with something that felt wrong and wondered whether you had the standing to say so, I'd be glad to know it reached you. You can share this story if you want someone else to hear it. I closed my eyes. The ferry horn sounded once more, farther out now, moving away across the water toward the mainland. I fell asleep with the lights on and the window dark and the cleat on the windowsill below in its place where it had always been.